Hello, America. From the soundstage of the Old Tucson Movie Studios in Tucson, Arizona, I'm Vic Caputo, welcoming you to Speak Up America, the television show. Today, Speak Up America is pleased to welcome from Libby, Montana, fourth-generation logger Bruce Vincent. And now, here's your host, Chuck Diaz.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to another segment of Speak Up America. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. It's a subject that's definitely near and dear to my heart, and that's the subject about trees, and the subject about loggers, and the subject about what we do with trees and logging. In fact, I think I'm standing on a wooden floor underneath this carpet, but for some reason or another, there are some Americans that just don't understand that. There's some Americans that don't understand that we probably use about 400 different wood products every week in some form or another. And the environmentalists, as far as I'm concerned, when they came up with the spotted owl, they really came up with a winner there, because they will admit that the spotted owl literally was manufactured to stop logging in the Northwest. Why? Because they want to stop logging in the Northwest. Because they also know that the best way to fill their bank accounts is to come up with some kind of subject that will get to you so that you'll part with some money, or you'll go along with something that they're coming up with. The spotted owl was claimed to only live in old-growth forest. It was claimed that they could only hunt for food in old-growth forest. And yet there are pictures of spotted owls taking meat out of a human's hand where they'll fly down and get it. The whole thing is a big hoax. I hope that we can bring some light to it for you today. And our guest at the end of the second segment will be Bruce Vincent. He's a fourth-generation logger from Libby, Montana. He had his equipment trashed by some organization, and it seems to me the only organization around town that's doing those kind of things these days is one called Earth First. I'm not saying that they actually did it. I don't know if Bruce actually knows that we did it, but that they did it. But we're going to get to that right after this break. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to get right to work on this tree thing, but I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how I go about doing something. When I first got involved in doing Speak Up America, I actually got involved in things that happen to do with people calling themselves Mexican Americans or Afro Americans or something like that, and that irritated the heck out of me because, like I mentioned in our first show, I happen to be an American of Mexican descent. But anyway, in looking in these matters through the media and stuff like this, it took me to very many places. I got a picture that I want to show you that's coming up when I went to the Wichita National Forest in Arkansas. That's me with some Forest Service people, and that's the superintendent is cutting a tree down to show me how many rings there are around the tree and how old the tree actually is. I want you to notice the brush, and there's a whole lot of trees growing in the Wichita right now. Bring up the second one, Scott. That's me shaking hands with the head of the Forest Service in Arkansas, at the Wichita anyway. Or actually, I think he was responsible for all western Arkansas. I hope the fact that his picture was shown on the show doesn't affect his career position. But anyway, the fact is that it takes that kind of work to go out and find out what's going on. The Wichita National Forest right now, if you flew over it or drove through it, you would not tell that it has ever been cut. And yet in the early 1900s, it was 90% clear cut, okay? 90% clear cut. I don't have a picture to show you right now of the entire Wichita, but it was 90% clear cut, and And back in those days, the people used to just cut trees and move on. And they made a lot of big mistakes, and the environmentalists today are using those mistakes that were created back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s to make us pay for it right now. I have some quotes that I'd like to show you. Let me bring up the first one. 6 million trees a day are planted in America. 6 million trees a day are planted in America. That is 2.3 billion trees per year. And yet you'll watch, what's his name, Superman, Christopher Reeves for relief. He'll get up there and pitch for you to send him 10 or 15 or 25 bucks because they want to plant 1 million or 2 trees by next whatever. All right, because they want your $25, and yet the forest industry itself plants 6 million trees a day. All right, for every tree that is cut down, 6 are planted. Now, what happens with those 6 that are planted? They may weed some of them out, and the end result is that the forests that are actually harvested have grown in the last 20 years by an estimate, well, no, by 23 to 25%. And yet the forests that are not harvested, which means not cut down, are and are protected. In other words, the environmentalists got the government to say, don't cut those trees down. They put a fence around them, literally. They have shrunk by 10% in the last 20 years. The reason that they've shrunk is because there's no humans in there taking care of them. It's because there's nobody taking care of the fact that they get diseases. They don't go in there and burn the underbrush. They don't go in there and actually manage the forest. But the environmentalists want you to think differently. I had another couple of quotes. Bring up the next one. This is what they're teaching our children in school. When you are as old as I am, the teacher, it will be a major crime to cut them down. Don't cut down trees because when all trees are gone, bring up the next half, you will probably die because it gives off oxygen for us to breathe. So if we cut down trees, we won't have oxygen to breathe, so we will die. That was given to a 9-year-old girl in Reno by her teacher. All right? The fact is that old growth forest doesn't give off oxygen the way everybody wants you to believe, and it's all a hoax. But we've got a really great guy that's going to talk to you about logging with regards to trees by the name of Bruce Vincent. He's going to be up on the next set, and I know you're going to enjoy him, and we're going to take care of that right after this.
I'm a logger from Libby, Montana. My dad was a logger, my brothers are loggers, my uncle, my cousins, my grandpa was a logger, my great-grandpa was a logger. I live in the forest that surrounds my community in the northwestern corner of Montana. And I live in the forest, I work in the forest, I play in the forest. And I was raised to believe that if we did a good job of taking care of the forest around my home, that forest was going to be the heritage that I could pass on to the next generation of my family. I'm not sure now, though, after the last 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to pass on that heritage. I'm scared right now. I'm scared for not only my family's heritage of forestry, but I'm also scared for the very forest that heritage of forestry is based on. And I want to tell you why. I think it's important that America understands what's going on in its forests right now because it's not what America thinks. I'm not fearful because of past mismanagement. I know America sees on the evening news every night a picture of death and destruction, a picture of America's forests that show them dying. They make constant claims of decades of abuse by the forest industry. They make constant claims of a decreasing forest base. Our forests are disappearing. They make constant claims of a rape and run industry that the American timber industry is, and it's just not true. Those claims don't square with the facts. Even after a couple of centuries of building America, after 200 years of making this country what it is, We have 70% of the forests that were here when Columbus landed. And even today, when we're providing for this consuming society, when we're providing wood products for them, we only use 60% of what grows every year. So if we do our job right and continue to manage our forests, I'm going to be able to have a legacy of forests to hand to my children that's even larger than the one that I accepted. But that's not to claim, or I don't mean to claim that we're perfect. I don't mean to say that we don't do anything wrong out there. We have a history that has some past abuses. We've made mistakes. We're making mistakes today, and we're going to make mistakes into the future. Forestry is an inexact science, but we are the best forest managers this planet has ever known. If you guys ever take a look at pictures of the forests around America, I encourage you to not look at the clear cut that you see on the evening news. I encourage you to look at the clear cut 15 or 20 years later. I encourage you to take a look at the forests of America in the history books and take a look at what this country looked like 70 or 80 years ago, and then compare it to the forests and what this country looks like today. We have forests that look beautiful in America today because of, not in spite of, our history of forest management. We aren't apologizing anymore for taking pretty good care of this country's forests. But we are fearful. We're fearful because something's wrong in America right now. We're fearful because mismanagement is causing rural communities like the one I'm from to collapse. At the same time, the forests around those communities are collapsing. I want to tell you a little bit about Libby, Montana, because it's a microcosm of what's happening nationwide in our forest towns. Libby is in a forest that's largely lodgepole pine. Much of America doesn't know about lodgepole pine, but they know more than they think because they watched it burn in Yellowstone. That's lodgepole pine. And the history of forests around Libby, Montana, the northern Rockies, is one of stand regeneration through catastrophic fire loss. The lodgepole pine tree only lives to be 80 to 120 years old. It's then old growth for that species. It dies, and then something comes through and starts a fire, and the forest burns down. During the heat of the fire, the cones of the next generation of that forest pop open, and the cycle starts all over again. The last time that cycle of burn was repeated in my hometown was in 1910. In 1910, 3 million acres of forest around my house burned down in a week. That forest is now 84 years old. The northern pine beetle has been killing it for the last decade. It's dead, it's dying, and it's ready to regenerate using a natural method of fire. It's not a question of if the forest around my home's going to burn. It's a question of when, if we don't do something to prevent that fire. There are people who have a different vision for my home than I do, however. There's a guy named Jasper Carlton with the Fund for Animals. Jasper lives in Boulder, Colorado. And he stated to our local paper, our little local media, that fire is a better manager than man, and he'd rather see the forests around my hometown burn than be managed by loggers. And he's filed the first of a series of lawsuits on the forest management in our community. The first lawsuit's based on grizzly bears. He says he's going to protect the grizzly bear by stopping us from logging. And if that doesn't work, if that doesn't gridlock our forest, then he's got 12 other species that he's going to file suit representing, like the bank-hugging monkey flower and the bastard flax and the Coeur d'Alene salamander. He'll keep doing it until he gridlocks management, and then he'll achieve his vision of us burning down. Something's wrong with that. Something's wrong when our community is collapsing, when our mills are closing, my family's laying off people that we've employed for decades, and the forest around my town is dying. Something's wrong not just in Libby. Libby's a microcosm of what's wrong. But something's wrong all over America when nonsensical pseudoscience is spewed by the likes of Dr. Tom Cruise, a sudden expert in forestry, or Dr. Meryl Streep, a chemist, or Drs. Ted and Jane Turner, experts on everything in life. Something's wrong when they spew their pseudoscience that's accepted by the media, printed as gospel, and gagged down by the public as truth. Something's wrong when our precious resources are being managed by agenda-driven professional litigants in courts instead of by professional land managers on the ground. Something's wrong when our professional land managers have lost the authority to manage our forests and our resources properly because special interest groups are well-funded and driven by emotion instead of fact. And they're driving America down a one-way street that's going to end in a wreck. Something's wrong when people believe, when our society believes that the only way to protect our environment is to lock man out. And America does believe that now. They've been given our story of resources on the evening news in two 20-second sound bites. The first sound bite is management of our forest. And that's the world's butt ugliest clear cut with the last tree falling into it. That's forestry. And the next 20-second sound bite is someone who doesn't like forestry, and he stands in front of a babbling brook with a pristine mountaintop and a flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other, and he says, all I want is clean air and water for my children. Something's wrong when those are the only choices America sees and they think they've got to pick between the two. Something's wrong because those aren't the only choices. Somewhere between preserve and destroy is where we provide for humanity. Preservation has its place. I live by a wilderness area and love it. But preservation does not equal conservation. And we're making a terrible mistake when we believe it does. Something's wrong when people think that preservation of their viewshed is the same as practicing forestry. Something's wrong when the old environmental adage, think global, act local, is suddenly turned into not in my backyard. And every place is somebody's backyard now. Something's wrong when that same public, the most consumptive public this planet has ever known, has suddenly decided that they can consume, but they don't have to produce. With everything that's wrong, and that's a pretty long litany of what's wrong, is there anything that's going right in Resource America right now? Yes, there is. Resource America is finally standing up. Resource America is tired of the campaign of misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, outright lies, and violence that's been levied against it for about 3 decades. We're done holding our head down for a job pretty well done. Resource America is now standing up and talking out. We're speaking about the truth. We're telling the truth about who we are, warts, pimples, and all. We're telling America some truths that are going to be pretty hard pills for that America to gag down, but they've got to. Telling truths like, if America continues to consume like no other society in history, but decides it doesn't have to produce, then America is going to become the greatest threat to our global environment through misguided lockup of our own. If America continues to stand on resource-providing communities, they're going to drive our resource industries out of America and into the waiting arms of developing countries that are long on resources, short on cash, and don't have the economic ability to be environmentally sensitive. 2/3 of the world's standing volume of timber is standing in Russia. That country has collapsed, and they'll send us raw logs to feed their people. But when they do, they'll use methods we quit using 30 years ago. That's not thinking globally, and that's a truth that we're telling America. If we become a nation that imports raw products and exports environmental havoc, then we've left a pretty sad legacy to our children. And it's one that we don't have to leave. Economy and ecology are same sides of the same coin. They come from the same Greek root word, oikos, eco, and means house. If we destroy our economy, we won't have the luxury of taking care of our environment. If we destroy our environment, we won't have the luxury of a strong economy. And the truth is, in America, we need our resource-providing communities like forestry to maintain a strong economy so we can afford to take care of the environment. And we're now talking about it. People in resource communities like myself are spending as much time talking as we are logging, because we have a vested interest in a healthy future of this environment that's being so heavily debated. We can't pretend where the rubber meets the road. If we're doing a poor job of managing the forest, we're the first to pay. And right now, through lack of management, we are mismanaging, and we're going to pay. But we're standing up. All across America in resource communities, there's a new legion of people starting a new social movement. Farmers and ranchers and miners are standing next to loggers and demanding that common sense be put back into our environmental laws. We don't need to gut our environmental laws. We need to refine their original intent. We don't need to destroy the environmental movement. We need to take it over. And we need to take our country back. We need to take it back with common sense and do it one family, one city, one county, one state at a time until we finally get America back where it belongs. At the Air Summit, they said sustainability was going to be defined and defended on a local landscape level. In rural America, there is now a social movement to do just that. And because there is so much at stake, and because there is going to be no simple solutions, only intelligent choices, there's a new breed of environmentalists that's standing up, ready to take the control of that movement, and that one's going to be us.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I hope you got something out of what Bruce had to say. The first time I saw you was I had just spoken in Washington D.C. to the Alliance for America, I believe.
Right.
It was. Yeah, and I was in a hurry to leave, and you came up to me and you shook my hand, and I thought that was really nice. And I had a meeting, and then I came back, and you were just getting up, and I decided, I think I'm going to listen to this guy, you know. And I heard you, and I'm sure glad that I stayed there because it was really nice. And I hope you all agree with that. I really hope you do. How many? Okay. I'd like to bring up a quote that we missed on the last segment. It says, "We in the Green Movement aspire to a cultural model in which the killing of a forest will be considered more contemptible and more criminal than the sale of 6-year-old children to Asian brothels." Okay? Now that was said by somebody in the Green Party, which, by the way, I understand in Arizona is now a political party, all right? But this is the mindset. This is the mindset of the same people that you're talking about that are trying to destroy rural America.
You know, and that mindset, I think, is what gives me more hope now than I've ever had before, because America sees stuff like that, and it's now being printed more and more because they're being more brazen with their agenda, and America doesn't accept that. That human exclusive type of language is turning America off. They're sick and tired of hearing what's wrong and ready to start hearing about what can be right. They're tired of that kind of bull, and they're looking for a new vision of the future, and I think that's where rural America steps in. They do believe that. There are people who worship trees, but I don't think the rest of America does. America loves trees, but they don't worship them. And as soon as their agenda is known, and we are smart enough to provide them with a vision of hope, what can be done, I think we're going to be much better off than we are right now. So let them keep spewing their agenda.
Of course, then the biggest problem that we have is the fact that the message that the American people receive is what they're determining, what they're making their determination with. We've only got a few seconds left in this segment, but as soon as we come back, I want to continue on that thought, which is probably one of the reasons why this program, for an example, even started. It's the media's fault that this program is being televised. It's the media's fault that we even have a shot at it. Because if they were doing their job, and if they weren't lying to you, they wouldn't. This program wouldn't be required. This little newspaper wouldn't be required. He wouldn't have to go around the United States talking about the truth and trying to get the truth across to people. But that's what's happening. We're gonna get back to this right after this break. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back. Chuck Diaz with Speak Up America, talking to Bruce Vincent of Libby, Montana. We're talking about logging issues and environmental statements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's one fellow up in Oregon that is the head of, I forget what organization, the one that was talking about the loggers, that they better learn how to drink cappuccino instead of logging. That elitist attitude also, persists in the environmental community, doesn't it?
And we've got news for him. We do drink cappuccino.
There you go. That's excellent.
They've painted a picture of loggers as some Neanderthal with snooze dribbling down his chin, knuckles dragging the ground, and an Eat Owl T-shirt, you know? And that's not accurate. Most loggers today, and for sure most of them in the future, are college degreed. I've got 2 college degrees. I have a master's in business. I'm doing forestry because I love it. I love the forest. And that portrayal of loggers as being Neanderthals is going to get beat up as we stand up and tell the truth.
Yeah, I'm along with that. The other thing, when we were talking about the movement, there's a movement across the United States right now called the Wise Use Movement, okay? And the environmentalists are trying to paint the Wise Use Movement as the evil doers of all time because they're anti the environment. In fact, Greenpeace just came out with a book about the 54, is it? The 54 anti-environmental organizations in the United States, and how they are funded by big business, they're funded by industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and all they want to do is rape the planet. And yet, out of the 54 organizations, Greenpeace alone spent more money in their budget in the United States last year than all 54 combined, mainly because most of the Wise Use Movement is made up of grassroots organizations that have budgets that are, what, you know, like a few bucks.
Yeah, a few bucks.
Don't you do a lot of traveling?
Oh, gee whiz, yeah. I travel all over the United States, and there is a grassroots movement, and they can call it whatever they want, but it's the next movement in America that's going to bring sanity back to where we need to be. These guys are upset because America's figuring out that there's a thin line between environmental sensitivity and environmental insanity, and when we hold their past rhetoric up to the light of truth, their arguments fall apart, and they don't want us to be out there in the debate at all. So when I started talking, Earth First, this is their manual, Earth First, an eco-defense, a field guide to monkey wrenching. When I started speaking, they blew our equipment up because they didn't want a voice out there. They understand that real people with real concerns talking about real issues on a local level is going to be a real threat to their movement.
Yeah.
Because we have a message that it is possible to provide for humankind and protect the planet. We know we can. And if that message gets out by their own admission, they have no arrows left in their quiver. So we're a threat.
When you really come down to it, a tree, and as you stated, the first thing that you're going to see on the news or something like that is a clear-cut forest. And I mean, when Hiroshima was bombed, I mean, it probably looked the same way, you know. But they don't go back and look at it. What was that movie? The Last of the Mohicans.
That was in a second-growth forest.
That was in a second-growth forest, and the director of the movie spent I don't know how many months to make sure that before he built that fort, he had to have old-growth forest. And he was shocked that during the filming of the movie, he found out that that forest had been clear-cut 17 or 30 years, 30 years before that. He was shocked.
But people don't know what they're looking at. We've trained a whole society to become visual scientists. If it's not pleasing to their eye, then it's got to be bad. And forestry in the first few years is not pretty. But I live in an area where the other method of management, natural management, is not pretty either. We have a 13,000-acre clear cut just 8 miles from my house. That happened in 4 hours one night because nature was ready to manage it. And that's not very pretty. Yeah. But we have a society that has been taught that if it doesn't look good, that it's okay for them to make a visual judgment. And that's really sad. They filmed, Steven Spielberg filmed Always in my valley. In fact, if you ever watch the movie Always, you can see my house a couple times. The reason he chose our valley is because it was beautiful. He found snow-capped mountains and a bunch of forest, and he needed fire. Well, we've got that. But if he chose that because of its beauty, and most of those people that see that film have a picture postcard mentality of my home. They think it's always looked like that. And if we just quit managing it, it would always stay like that. But Steven Spielberg wouldn't have done that movie there in 1911 because it did look like Nagasaki. Because nature had managed the whole valley. There wasn't a tree standing between my house and town. 12 miles. People don't have that historical perspective.
And at the same time, when people pick up a newspaper and they see some story about we're ruining our forests, and they show them this devastated devastated mountainside or something like that, in just as many cases as not, it's from a blowdown or a forest fire that had been there before, and they're claiming it to be a clear-cut area.
They claim it's a clear-cut area, and they also claim it's killing animals, and that's one of the things that really upsets me. We don't live in spotted owl up where I live. We live in a grizzly recovery zone, and I'm on the community involvement team to recover the grizzly bear in our area. And last year, in Weekly Reader, on the very first issue of the year for the third grade classes of America, there's a picture of a grizzly bear on the front page, and it said that we were threatening that animal because we were logging the trees that it eats. Grizzly bears don't eat trees. You know, the only way we can grow grizzlies in Libby, Montana is if we manage the forest to grow the shrubs and berries that bear does eat. If we stop logging, stop managing, the only other way to grow its food is for us to burn down wholesale. Yeah. So we can manage to grow the grizzly bear. And yet America doesn't know that, and we've got people Weekly Reader, for crying out loud, printing that kind of stuff, and there's a whole generation now that thinks bears eat trees.
Yeah, I hear that. There was also a case where a sheep herder up in Montana.
Oh boy!
We've only got a few seconds left on this segment. We'll come back to it. But basically, he had a grizzly was attacking some of his sheep, so he went out to see what was happening. He shot the grizzly bear, and he in essence got tried for murder, really, and he was fined what, $4,000 or something like that.
He was found guilty. He was of endangering the grizzly bear.
That's incredible. Okay, right after this, we're going to come back and talk about grizzly bears and trees and the environmental movement right after this commercial. Thank you, and welcome back to our session with Bruce Vincent. This session, we're going to turn it over to the audience and see if there's any questions out there that you might want to ask of Bruce. And we've got a gentleman standing right up there. Yes, sir.
What are environmentalists proposing as an alternative to wood products and the consumption in our society, and what kind of impact would that have economically and ecologically?
Well, the environmental community doesn't make many statements about what we should use instead of wood. They talk about a decrease in consumption a lot. They talk about the need for our society to consume a lot of things less. The facts are, however, that population is growing, and according to the World Commission on Environment and Development, is going to continue to grow. Some in the preservation or environmental movement point at that global population problem and then pretend that those folks aren't going to show up. But if we don't get smacked by an asteroid, we're going to have 10 to 14 billion people on this planet that are going to want food, clothing, and shelter. And the fact is, for shelter, as a wood product, is by far the most environmentally sensitive choice that America can make. The other alternatives that they could be driven to if we make wood so high priced that they can't afford it, and it's currently doing that. The price of a 2x4 is going up. And soon, the price of an aluminum stud or a steel stud will be less than a wood stud. And if that does happen, then we've made some choices that I think we'll have to pay for later on. The alternatives to wood are not energy friendly, and energy production and consumption are the biggest global environmental problems we face. Wood is energy friendly. It sits out in the sunlight and grows. It's energy friendly in production. We can manage it to increase its overall volume. We can't do that with the other non-renewable resources. So the other alternatives we're being pushed to are not very pretty, and the environmental community often doesn't point that out. It makes me really sad to stand in a line in a grocery store and have the little child in front of me choose plastic over paper because he thinks he's making a good environmental decision.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, when you really come down to it, I'd like to add to that, and that is that when you have people going around the United States or the world, and he mentioned, you know, the two scientists of all subjects on Earth, Ted and Jane. I call it the Ted and Jane show. Ted Turner, in a speech, is saying that we have to reduce the population of this planet by 5 billion people. There happen to be about 5.5 billion people on it now. That means Ted Turner is saying we have to reduce the number of people on this planet down to 500,000 worldwide. All right? Now, if they can get that done, then there'll be enough wood for everybody, and they won't have to worry about a darn thing. Isn't that right?
Yeah. It's amazing. That's the assumption that somehow our population is going to get to there, and the only way it will is if we have an economic, social, political, and environmental collapse. And if they keep it up, if they keep treating our economy as the enemy of the environment, we'll get them.
Well, when you really come down to it, what we used to call swamps, we now call wetlands. What we used to call jungles, we now call rainforests, okay? And right now, in protecting the wetlands, guess what's happening? A whole lot of mosquitoes are developing, and right now in Florida, I think they've got 11 people have a case of new type of I don't know what, and they think that these people are going to die because of it. You know, yes, sir. What's your question?
I was wondering if you all had a problem with spikers up there, and what are the effects of it? What damage could it cause to the loggers if they happen to cut down a spiked tree?
What does spiking do? Yes, first of all, we do have problems with that because Earth First is very active nationwide. They do spike trees, and what their attempt is, they say, is to make the forest company not go in and harvest those trees. But if they don't tell people that they put the spikes in, then one of my brothers approaches the tree to harvest it, and if he's using a chainsaw and his chain hits that spike, the chains go at high speed and they're razor sharp. That chain will break and it'll come back in pieces at him. If my brother's fortunate enough to not have that happen to him out in the woods, then we mail that tree to a mill where it rides on a carriage into a head bandsaw, a head rig. That bandsaw goes a couple thousand feet per second, and when it hits the spike, it blows up like a hand grenade. There's a guy in Northern California that's missing half his face because of metal in a tree. That's the kind of thing that those spikes do. They claim that they're protecting the trees. They're terrorizing people. And then they say they don't really mean to hurt people. But the fact is, if you want the new edition of Eco-Defense, a field guide to monkey wrenching, it has a neat little gizmo in there. It's called a ceramic spike. The metal spikes we got smart with. We determined that if we put a metal detector at the beginning of our mills, we could kick the logs out that had the metal in it before they hit the bandsaw. So they've now developed a ceramic spike that can't be detected, and it does the same job on the bandsaw as the metal one did. These people are out to hurt us. They're terrorists.
Yep, you got that right. They're terrorists. You know, it's incredible how when somebody comes over here from the Middle East, trained over there, and tries to blow up a building in New York City, you know, we all get mad. We say, "Oh, darn terrorists," or something like that. Or if they go into an airport and they shoot a bunch of people, those darn terrorists. And yet we got these guys over here that are terrorists in the United States. We got Paul Shepard Paul Watson of the Sea Shepherd Society living in Santa Monica, protected in the United States and giving a tax-free status.
But because it's under the banner of environmentalism, though, it doesn't get called terrorism. When they blew our dozer up, that was 5 years ago.
They actually blew your bulldozer up?
My dad was operating it, the engine failed, and that's 80,000 pounds of machine without any hydraulic brakes. When that happened, the media did report on it, but on page 5 of our regional paper, there's a little tiny blurb, and it said that ecotage had been practiced in the mountains of northwest Montana. They made it sound like a white-collar crime to save the planet. Had it been a $30,000 Mercedes-Benz in downtown Beirut, it would have been called terrorism.
That's exactly right.
But it happened against a dirt-headed logger in Montana, and they made it sound okay. Yeah. And there's something wrong with that.
Not only that, but in this same book, they don't like anybody to go out in the forest. They don't like motorcyclists or off-road bikers. They have a method here of taking care of them by digging a big ditch, putting a television tube in it, covering it up, so that when the motorcyclists come down the trail, the thing will explode, and of course he'll go flying somewhere.
Well, they've got things on tipping over power lines. A nice chapter on how to make power lines fall down. Ski lifts, because they're a blight on the hillside. A chapter on how to tip ski lifts over. I mean, but they, under the banner of environmentalism, they've somehow become okay.
Yes,
and that's
sir.
too bad.
Yes, sir. You've got a question.
My question was, as far as the EPA and the Bureau of Land Management, why is it that the sovereign states don't gain their sovereignty back and control their own forests, their own lands, as they were set up to do by the Constitution of the United States? And plus the fact, I can't really tell you what to do in Georgia, in Wyoming, anywhere else, but your state knows what they need within it, and it ought to take its sovereign capacity to take charge of it.
One of the things that came out of the Earth Summit, there was a lot of stuff that came out of the Earth Summit, but one of the very constructive things that came out was the knowledge that sustainability, how to provide for humankind today without compromising the next generation's ability to do the same, was going to be pounded out on a local landscape level with local stakeholders, people who had a vested interest in a solution, sitting around the table and pounding it out. They said that centralized decision-making had not worked and would not work. And Al Gore came home from the Earth Summit and immediately began centralizing all the power, the biggest power grab in the history of our nation, sucking all authority back to Washington, D.C., instead of empowering the local people who can figure this out. It's backwards. It's not going to work. You don't impose regulation over people without them blowing up. We should be watching every other country in the world that's now economically, politically, socially, and environmentally in trouble. Each one of them is trying to re-empower their people. And our nation is doing exactly the opposite. And we think we're going to get a different outcome than they've had? We won't. We're aimed exactly to where they're running away from.
Do you know that the Bureau of Land Management in Nevada right now is being challenged and told by counties up there that they cannot carry guns or badges anymore, that they're taking over their own land?
Okay, let's hold that. Let's hold that right now. We've got to take a break right now, and we're going to come back and we'll wrap up with our next segment. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We don't have much time right now, but I want Bruce to finish up the last minute we got with a statement that he has there.
Well, it's an answer to the question that was asked at the end of the last segment. It all gets back to local control. We have somehow got to figure out how to empower the people at a local landscape level so that they'll do the right thing for their own future. In the timber communities of the Northwest, we've written a vision document. It's how we think we can take care of the forests where we live and still provide for ourselves and the rest of humanity. If America would re-empower the people with a vested interest in the solution, then I think we'd figure our way out of this mess. And as long as we keep taking the power away from them, we're going to continue this mess.
Okay, I hear to that. I'll tell you another thing, okay? The EPA, now first of all, let me just say it the way I really want to say it. Socialism has been around a long time. The only difference between socialists and communists is a communist will come up and put a gun to your head and say, give me your property. A socialist will try to talk you out of your property. And the socialists haven't had a good story to tell ever since Plato, but they've got a good one now. They can take your property away from you by scaring you, by telling you that there's pesticides that are going to kill you, that if we chop trees down, we're going to suffocate, and all these kind of things like that. The EPA is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the regulations are coming out more and more and more, and they're designed to take your rights away. That's basically, the bottom line is, the environmental movement is socialism's flagship. See you next week. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming down. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. We're going to be doing this hopefully with any